Well, where do we start? Today, we're here to celebrate a life. And given that the guy knew how to celebrate, it's up to us to make sure we do. I would take it as a personal favour as well, because I was a good friend as well, and it's going to be tough for me too. So the more we laugh and clap and cheer, and if noise control shows up, I think Stu would be absolutely chuffed. In fact, he'd be bloody delighted. I'm Murray Ferris, I'm your celebrant today. As I said, I was a friend of Chris's, and I've known the Spence family for a fairly long time now. And I've got to tell you, I hope you've bought a thermos and some sandwiches, because I've got some paperwork from all around the planet here that I've got to read out, and it could be a wee bit longer than normal. To Pat, Lisa, Daniel, Sean and Christopher, and both the extended Spence and Bowen families, today is probably the worst day of your life. And I cannot believe the amount of interest in the town Stu's passing has created. Letters to the editor. I've never seen letters to the editor about someone who's died. His contribution has been huge. He's brought Gisborne to a standstill today. They've postponed cricket, there's shops closed, and there's shops on minimum staff. And I think that's an absolute tribute to the man. Today's service is being live streamed around the world, and I would like to welcome everybody that's watching, wherever you are, and sharing today's celebrations. Today we're going to send Stu on his last great adventure. And looking around me at the huge crowd, it's clear how many lives he touched. And in this business, you tend to distance yourself a wee bit. You have to. But I've got to say, I'm hurting, just like you guys. When my wife rang and told me what had happened, I couldn't believe it. Big, strong, bulletproof, smiley Stu. Who would have thought? He was larger than life, and I personally never ever thought anything would happen like this. He's the sort of guy you'd love at your side if you were in trouble. Stu would want us to cut loose today. It wasn't his style to be shy. He wasn't big on decorum. He'd certainly want us to celebrate. All the letters I've got here today talk about his ability to celebrate. There could be a couple of breweries around the world go bust. I certainly wouldn't buy any shares. I spoke to Stu just before he left to go to Australia. Sat down at the Zest Cafe and had a coffee, and he was as low as I've ever seen him, quite frankly. But we talked for about an hour. Had enough bladder-aching coffee to sink a battleship. It never moved him, but I was in trouble. And he said, his words, not mine, I'm heading off to the outback to sort out my shit. And he did. He headed out to the outback. Trish's life had been his life, and her death was his death. He was a hollow shell. And he constantly spoke about the poor little bugger. That was Trish. And how much she went through, how hard she fought, and Stu, of course, was right there beside her every step of the way. The letters to the editor, as I said earlier, tell the story. Mum, Pat, and brother Sean wrote me a summary of Stu, things that most people probably don't know. There's a lot of things I didn't know about him. He didn't sort of waffle on about himself a lot. What you saw was what you got. Pat, you're an absolute inspiration, and I'd like to acknowledge that. She said, I've got a few things I'm going to say to the little bugger when he comes back, and I'm sure she did. But he's never listened to you in the past, and I'm not too sure he did now. Stu was born in Gisborne to loving but unsuspecting parents. I love that. What weren't you suspecting? Blindsided you, the little bugger, didn't he, eh? He lived on his formative years on Waipoua Station, of course, which a lot of people know at Whatututu, and he was schooled there. At the age of 13, he attended boarding school at Napier Boys High, but he returned to Gisborne 18 months later when Pat and Chris moved into town, and he attended Lytton High. Stu had a good brain, but he chose not to make the most of it. Just sounds like my report. I think they had rubber stamps with all that nonsense on it, didn't they? So it was suggested he might do better to get a job rather than a higher education. According to Pat, he had the attention span of a gnat. At the know-all stage of his life, and wanting to obtain good work ethics, his father Chris asked his old friend Bruce McIntyre if Stuart could work for him. It was a turning point in Stu's life. Not only did he gain those important ethics, but he became part of the McIntyre's extended family. He dearly loved Bruce and Nancy, and Hamish became one of his dearest friends. He was always there in times of crisis. Been a constant companion, I'd reckon. Stu did many varied things in way of jobs. He worked on a Korean fishing boat. Now, I've been on a Korean fishing boat, and there's about that much room between the decks, so he must have slithered around on his belly. And they smell. Soon after he turned 21, he decided to do his OE, destination of choice being the UK, although he thought he might just sort of stop off in Houston for a while. Discovered they played rugby there, and that he might stay over. This turned into 9 years. Various jobs saw him doing demolition. He was always successful at that. And then he tried to demolish himself several times. Laying tennis courts, and just printing on your type. It's very small, Pat. I'll have to put my glasses on soon, but I'm being proud here. And he finally got work at AT&T, erecting and placing satellite dishes, which took him from state to state, still based in Houston. Unfortunately, his marriage to Chris's mother didn't work out, but they kept in touch, and as a result, there was always contact between Stuart and Christopher, for which we thank Ruth and Jeff Overton, and Christopher's here today. In 1999, Stuart met the love of his life and his soulmate, Trish. They married in Lake Tahoe in 2000. What a wedding that was. He was taken in and loved by the Bowens, Trish's family. 2 years later, they came to Gisborne for their delayed honeymoon, and Trish fell in love with the place. And that's when I first met her, when she was selling advertising at 2ZG. I've never seen a woman more stunning. Intimidating, actually. She towered over me, but an absolutely gorgeous woman. At some stage, Trish suggested they come to New Zealand to live, so they returned to Gisborne in 2003, where they soon gathered friends. They were both people magnets. Not long after they arrived, Stuart's father suggested that they begin a partnership with the cafe. So was born the World Cafe, and there was many successful evenings there. It was a pleasant place to go, and my wife and I went there regularly. Later, Stuart and Trish began talking of starting a new business. So when the cafe was sold, they began Smokin' Hot. The idea being to make and sell smoking ovens, but when demonstrating these, they had to go all over the show, which led to the catering business. They catered for many private functions around the district very successfully. The business also began to make and build other items in steel, including fences, and so began his relationship with Beetham Village. And while erecting fences, he also assisted by finding various tradesmen as required, and as a consequence to that, became a building contractor. During this period, a great relationship was formed with Andrew, Roger and Aaron, the latter having already worked at the Spence restaurant, and these three were always there for Pat when Stuart was away, which was pretty regularly. Stuart and Trish decided to try a new life in Australia and prepared for this last year after son Chris had come to Gisborne and spent some time here with his father's family and getting a handle on everybody. And at the end of September, they made their journey to their new life. But within a couple of days of their arrival, Trish's cancer returned with a vengeance, which resulted in 6 months of heartbreak and tears. Towards the end, Trish returned to spend time with her family in the States, while Stuart sorted out their belongings and found a home for Piggles, the dog. Hamish McIntyre accompanied Stuart on that trip from Brisbane to Melbourne, and it was at this time they made friends with some Dubbo people. Both Stuart and Hamish developed a soft spot for the place. Stu also appreciated its proximity to gold and opal fields, perfect for his new metal detector. No end to the guy. Special thanks to Mark and Joe up there in Brisbane for everything they did for Stuart when Trish learned the bad news. No one could have supported them more or better. Trish passed away 1 month short of her 46th birthday in March this year. More heartbreak for Stu. He was devastated. In May, he returned to Gisborne to spread some of her ashes and with her Waka friends. They returned to Texas, paperwork, excuse me, to enable the family to spread some ashes there as well. With many friends in the States, where he felt so much at home, Stuart extended his stay, and during this period he began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you to all those true friends who rallied around him, especially Bill, Jack, Leather and Claire and Franz. On Stu's return to Australia, he found work on Kelgar Station near Dubbo and began doing everything that came to hand, including cooking at the end of the long day, truly in his element, and when last spoken to, he was in a really happy space and beginning to plan for his future, which makes his demise all that more terrible. He really was a people magnet, and we thank all those who rallied around him and to his new friends and family out there in Kelgar Station. Special thanks, you, Joshua, the police officer who was continually in contact with family and also had the unpleasant task with Stu. Our special thanks to Digby and Chloe, who worried that Stuart was had not returned home and went to look for him. When they found Stu, Digby stayed at Stuart's side until the emergency services arrived, and we know how hard that must have been. Last but by no means least, our thanks to Hamish McIntyre, who went through Stuart's anguish with him and would be by his side whenever and wherever that place would be. I'm just going to read a few passages out of all this paperwork here to give you a bit of a perspective on where he was going. Yeah, thanks, mate. This is a friend in the States, David Stuart, who sent Pat a wonderful 6-page letter. And when I read it, I thought, my God, there's sides to everyone that you don't really know. And I've never seen a softy side of Stu. Never had to, mind you, but he wasn't the sort of bloke that rushed up and hugged you or anything like that. But he had some plans, and David was working on those with him. So this fella grabbed a 6-pack of Shiner Block, a Rice favourite, which they'd shared on their last visit, and started to talk about what Stu was going to do regarding his future. They both had some tragedy, and they were about putting their lives back into some sort of order. I decided to cut back on my hours and spend more time with the family, and he decided to pursue his love of the land and mineralogy. And with all my university contacts, and I have a couple of Rice professors on staff at the University of Houston, we figured out a great path to get him his GED, which is the high school equivalent certificate to start his college career. So off he went to Australia to wrap things up there, and he decided to sell that great truck of his. It was worth more than there than trying to do anything else. But I am biased because I did some work on it years ago. I talked to him a couple of times in late October and early November to let him know that he was good to go back here in Houston. He was upbeat, optimistic, hilarious, and kind enough to concern himself with how I was getting on. So he had plans, and big ones, and he was going to, on top of all the other wonderful things he's done, he was going to go to university. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall there. I won't share what I'm thinking, but yeah, I've got a whole lot of other stuff I'm going to read later, but just got to flick back through here so I find my place again. This has been a bit of a moving target. It's an important time now because we're going to do some eulogies. Now, there's probably people in the room that would love to come up and say stuff, but I've got to tell you, I've already got 8. And as much as we'd love to hear from you, we won't be opening the floor, but we'd love to hear from you later on. The family, I'm sure, would love to share the stories that you have. So, as I said, the great inspiration for me particularly, Mum Pat is going to come up and say some words.
Okay, well, Murray's introduced me, so you know who I am. These are Stuart's siblings, his sister Lisa, brother Daniel, brother Sean. This is Christopher, son he was very proud of. Anyone that's had more than one child will know exactly that you do never have 2 identical children born. They varied from 2 days. Thinking the given date wasn't right, so it'd come out 3 weeks later, or one that wouldn't stand still or be still inside you using a trampoline. And then when it came to getting born, no energy, so it had to be helped. Then we had Stuart. He was given his date, and he was on time, and he was in one heck of a hurry. And that seemed to set the format for his life. We all know that he was pretty accident prone. And the 3 that really stand out for me, we're out at Waipoa and there's no handy hospital or doctor, so you've got to do your own repairs. And we had Macrocarpa hedge around the house, which stood about 20, 30 feet high. And for those that don't come from New Zealand, a Macrocarpa is like a fir tree, but very thin branches, which are very thin, very close together. And I happened to step outside in the garden, and from somewhere behind I heard, "Look at me, Mum." And as I turned, I heard, "Whoops." And then I watched this tree sort of waving in the wind as Stuart came down, bouncing from branch to branch. He landed at the bottom, and I just stood there thinking, oh, heck. He used to bellow like a bully calf. And all of a sudden, the bully calf got going, and I thought, he's alive. Amazingly, the most damage done was the fact that he was only wearing shorts, and he scraped back and front quite badly, but he heals quickly. Then came the Evel Knievel days. And he'd set up a jump behind the house. I couldn't see it. It was a hill and then a plank and over a tin. So come out and watch me, Mum. So I said, okay, I'll just finish this and I'll be there. Anyway, he must have decided to do another practice run, because as I stepped outside, the bully calf got going again. Came round the garage, full tilt. He and the bike had parted company. He'd gone down, the bike had ended on top of him with the mudguard stuck in his head. Again, he heals quickly. And then the last one was we were having another room put into our house, and half of the floor had been covered. Soaking wet day, all the kids inside. Stuart decided to ride his bike around and thought he'd try Evel Knievel again. The jump just didn't take, it wasn't far enough, so he saved himself by his 2 front teeth. And I remember hearing the bully calf go, I thought, oh my gosh, wide open mouth, teeth dangling, and I thought, now what do I do? So I undressed him, put him in the bath, gave him a couple of disprin, rang his father, who this time he had to come to town to see the doctor. I introduced my children, but I would also like to introduce these people over here who go back to our Waipoa days, and they've known Stuart since he was born. They could probably tell you a few stories too. With ukuleles, eh, Jean? When he used to do his Elvis Presley impressions. Anyway, we're a caring family. Obviously, there were the arguments and such that went on, but they never lasted. There was never no speaks, nothing like that, and there was always greeted with a kiss, left with a hug, or when they were living at home, always a good night kiss. When they went overseas, the whole 4 of them were out of the country at one time. But I got regular phone calls, sometimes more regular than others. The really regular ones they were at a low ebb, so they'd ring mum and have a chat. When I didn't hear from them, I knew they were happy. With Trish, when she was so ill, I think it was almost daily phone calls. And when after her passing, she came home, did her ashes, returned to the US, and I heard less and less. I was getting these little one-liner emails, so I knew he was on the road to recovery. Since Chris's death, I've come to rely on Stuart more than I would have the others, because I've got 2 sons living overseas. Lisa's been my little stalwart. Stuart, you really were my rock, love. There was one other thing I was going to say, I couldn't remember what it was. Oh, all phone calls ended with I love you. Very important. Stuart, I love you. I told you I'd have the last word. Thank you.
Well, those haven't made a difference, so I'll leave them there. Daniel, your turn, buddy. Just about thought I'd forgotten it, so thankfully it's still there. Hello, everyone. This is all a little bit weird. I don't think any of us can probably remember being in a room with Stuart when you were able to get a word in edgewise, or leave without him teasing you mercilessly. Thanks for everyone for turning up. As a family, we all appreciate it. And thanks to all his friends who are joining us via the link up as well, especially of those who had links with Stu from his times in the US. He met so many great people, and he really came into his own as a young man. They say that clothes make the man, but I think we can all agree that so far as Stuart went, that was a load of bull. He was able to make most things look scruffy, but you knew with him that really didn't matter. He was rough, but he had a true heart of gold. And you always knew where you stood with Stuart. If he thought you were acting like an idiot, and I could have replaced that phrase with a number of substitute words, you knew it. But he also made friends easily, because he knew a lot of idiots. He was related to loads of us, and he'd been one himself plenty of times, so he easily forgave it. When I think about Stu, there's one story in particular that I think emphasises what he was all about. And I think this story may have grown some legs through time, and I wasn't there to see it, but I still love it, and I like to think I almost was there the number of times I've heard it. But the guys at the works
which we're going to later. And for those of you in the US who don't know what that is, it's a bar, and you probably could have guessed that. They had a bit of trouble with a safe they were unable to open. So Stu happened to be there, and he said he might be able to help out. I'll just go and get my tools, he said. No doubt some lock-picking equipment he'd picked up on his travels. So he disappeared, walked back in a bit later, dressed up in his shorts, a singlet and a pair of gumboots, and had a whacking big sledgehammer. So he knocks the door off with a few big swings and proudly announced he'd got it open. And that was Stu around, really. I mean, he saw a problem, offered to help, and then with a delicate touch of a bull in a china shop, he rampaged his way to a solution. Either way, he wouldn't have just sat around doing nothing about it. I think it's the mark of a man that so many people have turned up today, or joined us online, and some from a hell of a distance. I don't know where Jack's sitting at the moment, but hey, Jack. Yeah, I know what he looks like. I just couldn't see him. But I think we can take heart that we too must have had something about us, because if we didn't, we wouldn't have been classed as his friends. After the sad passing of Trish earlier this year, Stuart had just started to turn things around and was getting really positive about his future and had a plan for the next stage of his life. Next year, and amongst 1,001 other things he was planning on doing, there was talk of heading to the UK for the World Cup, and I was looking forward to him coming over. His son Chris, who's come up with us today from Texas, also featured heavily in his plans, and I know that he really cherished his time with Chris recently and hope to see a hell of a lot more with him. So it's with great sadness that we bid him farewell, but I know he didn't want tears and that he wanted the people to have a blast at his final party. So we'll do what we can, I'm sure. It won't be easy, mate. Rest easy.
Talisa. Feel good?
Shithead, bastard child, cheeky darky, Māori princess, takes chocolate pedo, ghetto Barbie dog shit bitch.